This is an introduction to two techniques that are useful for production management. One is the Program Evaluation and Review Technique, usually abbreviated just as PERT. PERT charts are useful primarily in the planning and organizing phases of a project. The technique was developed by Booz Allen Hamilton as part of a U.S. Navy contract in 1958. It uses task times and dependencies to determine the sequence of tasks that control how long the entire project will take. This is termed the critical path of the project. This also shows us where we might place additional resources to reduce the overall project elapsed time. The other technique is the use of Gantt charts to indicate the progress of a project. These bar charts are useful primarily in the leading and controlling phases of a project. They are termed Gantt charts after Henry Gantt, who was one of the early users of the technique around 1910. They show the planned schedule of the tasks for the project, as well as showing the progress to date. The purpose of a PERT chart is to determine the overall project cumulative elapsed time and to determine ways to allocate resources in order to reduce that project cumulative elapsed time. The first thing that is required is a list of tasks, their execution times, and their dependencies. The dependencies of a task are the previous tasks that must be completed before the subject task can begin. For instance, for the final assembly of a bicycle, we may need 4 items: a frame, handlebars, a seat, and 2 wheels. These 4 items are the dependencies to the assemble the bicycle task. The execution time for the bicycle assembly task might be around 0.75 hours. This information is summarized in the diagram. The next step might be painting, labeling, testing, who knows. The first step in the PERT process is to develop a list of tasks. Included in the table should be a task identification, the task execution time, and a list of the task dependencies, those other tasks that must be completed before this one can start. Second step, from the table with task identifiers and dependencies, generate a topological diagram showing the dependencies beginning at the left and moving forward in time to the right. Step 3, add the task execution times to the topological project diagram. Step 4, determine the project cumulative elapsed times after each of the tasks. Step 5, identify the project's critical path. This is the series of tasks that has the longest cumulative elapsed time. Step 6, identify ways to reduce the total project cumulative elapsed time by adding or moving resources. Here is step 1 in the PERT process. The task table includes the task identification, its dependencies, and the task execution times, the amount of time it will take to complete the task once it is started. In this case, the time unit is days. To develop this table requires knowledge of the particular product and manufacturing process, whether it be airplane manufacturing, automobile manufacturing, or shoe repair. I don't have the expertise in any of these areas, so I'll use some generic tasks A, B, C, and so on. In this case, the first task is A, which has no dependencies and which requires 2 days to complete after it has started. Tasks B, C, and D all depend on A and require 4, 6, and 5 days to execute respectively. Task E requires tasks C and D to be complete before it can start and will take 3 days to execute once it has started. Task F has a single dependency, task B, and requires 4 days to execute. Task G has 2 dependencies, tasks E and F, and takes 2 days to execute. To finish requires task G to be complete, and there is no additional execution to be performed. This shows a topological diagram of the tasks to complete the project. In reality, for a project of any size, just arranging the task blocks so there are not too many crossover lines is a bit of a challenge. First, we can show the starting point. Call it Start. Next, look at the tasks table. Task A has no dependencies, so can start anytime. Tasks B, C, and D all depend on A, so we can add those arrows. Task E depends on both C and D, so there are two dependency arrows coming into task E. Task F depends only on task B. Task G depends on both tasks E and F, so gets two dependency arrows coming into it. Completion of the project depends only on G, so we can add an arrow from task G to End. This is the start of the PERT chart, showing the dependencies in diagram form. The next step is to add the task execution times. We could have added the task execution times as we were developing this dependency diagram, but for this introductory explanation, I thought we would keep the two items separate. We can read the task execution times from the tasks table. Task A takes 2 days, so it gets a 2, and so forth, until we've added all the task execution timing information to the PERT chart. So far, all we've done is to transfer task identifications, execution times, and dependency information from the task tables to a diagram. One of the challenging parts of this in a real project is getting nice topological layout so there are not too many crossing lines. For our small project, this has not been a real consideration. Next, we are going to calculate the project cumulative elapsed times from the task start times and execution times. The project cumulative elapsed time before we've started the project is 0. A real-life project would also use 0 as the starting time until the project was approved, at which time they would begin using actual dates. So I don't feel too bad about our time 0 starting date. Let's see now. Task A can start at time 0, and it takes 2 days to execute, so task A will be complete at the end of day 2. A's starting time is 0, and A's finish time is 2. These two project cumulative elapsed times are shown on the diagram. Tasks B, C, and D all depend on task A, and only task A to be complete, then they can start. The start time for all three of these projects is right after day 2. The cumulative elapsed time after task B has completed is its starting time of 2 days, plus its execution time of 4 days, or 6 days in all. The cumulative elapsed time after task C has completed is its starting time of 2 days, plus its execution time of 6 days, or 8 days in all. The cumulative elapsed time after task D has completed is its starting time of 2 days, plus its execution time of 5 days, or 7 days in all. These three project cumulative elapsed times are shown on the diagram. Finally, we get to a piece of the PERT chart development that's a bit more challenging. Task E depends on both tasks C and D. Task E cannot start until both of the dependency tasks have been completed. Task C is complete after 8 days, and task D is complete after 7 days. So task E can start after 8 days. Each task cannot begin until all of the dependency tasks have been completed. So we need to take the maximum project cumulative elapsed time coming into each task. We add this maximum incoming time to the task execution time to get the project cumulative elapsed time at the end of the task. So task E can start after 8 days. Its execution time is 3 days, so the project cumulative elapsed time after E is complete is 11 days. Task F only has one dependency, task B. Task F can start after 6 days, takes 4 days, so the project cumulative elapsed time out of task F is 10 days. Task G is another interesting task in that it also has two dependency tasks. Task E, which is complete after 11 days, and task F, which is complete after 10 days. So task G can start after 11 days and takes 2 days to execute, so the project cumulative elapsed time after task G is 13 days. So that's it then. Well, not quite. Remember, way back at the beginning, we discussed identifying the critical path and considering methods to reduce the overall project time. Well, it's time for that now. What is the critical path? It's the sequence of projects that takes the most time, and by so doing determines the total elapsed time of the entire project. If we can reduce the time of the tasks in the critical path, we can reduce the time of the entire project. To determine the critical path, we start at the endpoint. There is only one path entering the endpoint from task G, so task G is on the critical path. Note that I'm showing task G and the cumulative elapsed time after task G is completed in red to highlight it. There are two task dependencies for G, tasks E and task F. To determine the critical path coming into G, we select the largest cumulative elapsed time value coming into G. That is the 11-day value coming from task E. So task E is also on the critical path. As was the case with task G, there are two task dependency for E, task C and task D. To determine the critical path coming into task E, once again we select the largest cumulative elapsed time value coming into task E. That is the 8-day value coming from task C. So task C is also on the critical path. Task A is the only dependency task feeding task C, so task A is also on the critical path of the project. We now have the critical path shown in red, A, C, E, G. This completes step 5 of our PERT chart process, identifying the project's critical path. And what was that final step 6? The final step in the PERT chart process is to identify opportunities for reducing the overall project time. How do we do that? To do that, we look at the critical path. Reducing the time of tasks not on the critical path doesn't help us, since they're not on the critical path. Only the tasks on the critical path are holding us up. Which task on the critical path? In a real-world project, there might be a bit more to go on. For our exercise, we should probably focus on the largest target. Since task C is the longest task execution time on the critical path, that is the obvious target for reducing the overall project completion time. So we could add some resources, perhaps people, to task C to complete it quicker. There are two caveats to keep in mind if we do this. After we've reduced the task C execution time, it may be that task C is no longer in the critical path. There will then be another critical path, and we would do the execution time reduction exercise on another task in the new critical path. In the real world, there may be a finite number of resources available for the project. By adding some resources to task C, we may have to reduce the number of resources devoted to some other task. This is a summary of the project cumulative elapsed time calculations. For each task, there is at least one, and perhaps more than one, incoming project cumulative elapsed time. The task start time is the maximum of these incoming project cumulative elapsed times. The exit project cumulative elapsed time is the sum of this maximum plus the task execution time. There may be multiple incoming project cumulative elapsed times. There is only one exit project cumulative elapsed time. This elapsed time is forwarded to all the other tasks for which this task is a dependency. This calculation is repeated for each task until all have been accounted for and we have the total project cumulative elapsed time. Here is one of the favorite PERT chart errors. One must use the maximum of the incoming elapsed times, not the minimum. This is actually my own favorite PERT error, so I can sympathize with it, but it's wrong, so don't do it. This is another common PERT chart error. I have no idea why people do this. The only reason I can guess at for this error is that my explanation of the PERT process has not been good enough, and that truly desperate people will add any two numbers they can find to get a result. To determine the cumulative elapsed time after task A, add the execution time of task B to that of task A. Also, to determine the cumulative elapsed time after task A, add the time of task C, and so on. This is an error. Please don't do it. In our PERT nomenclature, each of the blocks indicates a task and an execution time. For instance, in this diagram we have task A that takes 2 days or some other time unit. Also task B that takes 4 days, task C that takes 6 days, and so on. The links between them indicate the cumulative elapsed time at that point in the overall project. If we wished, we could also give it a milestone name. After task B is completed, for instance, a reasonable milestone name might be task B completed or bicycle sprocket assembled. That is, the milestone name would indicate the progress made to that point. So in our nomenclature, the blocks indicate tasks and execution times. The lines indicate cumulative elapsed time and can also be used to indicate a milestone, though we have not stressed this latter point. An alternative PERT nomenclature is to have the lines indicate the tasks and execution times and have the blocks indicate cumulative elapsed times and milestones. The diagram shows just a portion of the PERT chart we've been working with. Notice that the lines indicate a task and execution time. For instance, task A takes 2 days, task B 4 days, and the rest are indicated on the lines. The blocks indicate a status such as D done 7 days, indicating that the milestone D has been reached at this point and the cumulative elapsed time at this point is 7 days. Yeah, that's a pretty unimaginative name for a milestone, but hopefully it gets the idea across. I mentioned this nomenclature so that you will be prepared should you see a PERT chart that doesn't seem to fit our model. I won't be providing any problems for this method. An extension to our PERT method is to include a bit of uncertainty in our scheduling. That is, rather than estimate that an individual task will take a certain definite amount of time, recognize that task times are uncertain and provide a range of times so that we can incorporate these into our PERT model. So, rather than estimating task A's execution time as 2 days, in addition to the expected execution time of 2 days, we can also provide minimum and maximum values for the execution time. For task A in the diagram, we've shown task A's execution time as a minimum of 1 day, expected 2 days, and maximum 3 days. I've done the same thing for the rest of the tasks in the PERT chart diagram. And of course, along with the stochastic representation of the task execution times, the cumulative elapsed times will also reflect the minimum, expected, and maximum values. So in our PERT chart excerpt, the cumulative elapsed time after task C is completed shows a minimum value of 5 days, expected 8 days, and a maximum of 11 days. By this time, we've pretty much beaten PERT charts to death. So now on to the Gantt chart. Compared to the PERT chart, the Gantt chart is fairly easy. The idea here is just to convert the information from the PERT chart to the Gantt chart. Basically, we just pick off the task start and end times from the last version of the PERT chart and display them in a column-type graphical format. Ideally, the days indicator would be on the dividing lines, but Excel doesn't really work well that way, so please bear with me as we go through this example converting the PERT information to the Gantt chart. Task A starts at time 0, takes 2 days to complete, and finishes at the end of day 2. That information is shown on the first line of the Gantt. Tasks B, C, and D all start when task A has completed immediately after the end of day 2. Task B starts immediately after day 2, takes 4 days, and finishes on day 6. I've shown it in green since it's not on the critical path. Task C also starts immediately after day 2, takes 6 days to complete, and finishes on day 8. Since it's on the critical path, I've shown it in red. Task D starts immediately after day 2, takes 5 days to complete, and finishes on day 7. It's not on the critical path, so I've shown this one in green also. Task E starts after both tasks C and D are complete. So we show task E commencing just after 8 days cumulative elapsed time when task C has completed and lasting through day 11 since it takes 3 days. Since task E is on the critical path, I show it in red. Task F starts after task B is finished, 6 days of cumulative elapsed time, takes 4 days to execute, so it finishes at day 10. It's not on the critical path, so I show task F in green. Task G can start after cumulative elapsed time day 11 when task E has completed. It takes 2 days execution time, so has completed at cumulative elapsed time day 13. And that's it. What we've looked at so far is the use of the Gantt chart to reflect the plan as developed with the PERT chart. The Gantt chart is also useful for tracking the progress of the individual tasks and the overall project. Generally, different colors are used to show the progress, a basic color for the plan and a different color for the amount of work that has been completed. In this Gantt chart, we've shown what it might look like after 4 days if all the tasks have gone as planned, and we're using blue to show the progress. In the real world, again, hardly anything goes precisely as planned. So rather than having just a plan and a progress coding, Gantt charts typically include 3 items for each task. A plan, like we've already shown, a forecast, which we use when the initial plan is no longer valid, but we want to keep the information on both the initial plan and this modified forecast and the actual work on the task. This diagram is identical to the previous ones, except that I've identified each task's timeline as plan, and I'm just using yellow. For each of the tasks, we may decide that we need to change the starting date, the execution time, the end time, or even all 3. In this Gantt chart, the plan schedule is shown in yellow and the forecast schedule in orange. The project manager may be aware of the required schedule changes before the project tasks have started, or the project may be well underway by the time the delays are recognized. The changes may be small or may be large enough that we may have to go back to the PERT chart and perform another critical path analysis. Small scheduling changes on tasks that are not in the critical path will not affect the overall project completion time. Increases in execution times of tasks that are on the critical path will likely require more PERT analysis. In this Gantt chart, I've added the actual task working days. Note that some actual entries actually match the plan and forecast dates. Some start later and last longer, and a few even start early and come in on schedule. Ah, the joys of project management. That's it for the PERT and Gantt chart explanations. I hope you've gotten some good information without it being too tedious. If you have any questions or wish to make any comments, you can contact me at djwilhelm@waketech.edu. Cheers.